So Ian Williams has another question, which is Western Sahara, Azerbaijan, what happens when teacher is otherwise occupied? And I think that goes to the COVID question, which is, my field is immigration, and every immigration expert said to me, who cares about the Mexican border for a while? It's COVID, COVID, COVID. Do not make this mistake of thinking that they can do more than it. That is so big. So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think in terms of COVID, I think COVID is going to be very important. And when I explain this, I go around the world and I talk about it. So in Europe, for instance, COVID initially resulted in the first major reshuffling of red lines in Europe since the European Union was established, or even before. All of the barriers suddenly went up. Suddenly, there were barriers between countries in Europe, real barriers. I mean, with police standing on highways, turning cars back, even though there was no border crossing point at that point. They'd all been taken down. But gradually, as people began to, become more secure and more, understand that they were really have to, act together, or they're all going to die separately. To mix them, I don't know if that was a good metaphor, but at any rate,
You hang together or you hang separately.
right. That's right. Yeah. They suddenly began to say, we really do have to look at this as a continent-wide issue, and those red lines we began returning to the situation, antebellum, shall we say? And that's very encouraging. I think that the fact that kind of a red line was so important, especially to Europe and to other parts of the world, that they were willing to ignore the immediate threat to their own people, to understand that the long-term benefit was to have this open frontier system that has worked so well for so long.
Although he's talking about Western Sahara and Azerbaijan.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Are those two places that will, get up to hijinks if everybody in the West is focused on COVID?
Maybe. Let's take Azerbaijan first. Azerbaijan and South Ossetia, which kind of go together. I don't know why, but they seem to have some things. They're interesting places because that red line seems to have worked pretty well, and to now. In other words, the Russians were forced back across the border. There were UN forces came in. Sarkozy went over and played the grand, poobah and whatever, and then managed to establish some kind of peace between these countries. And they went back. Now what's happening is and I talk about this in the book because I actually talked to a couple of these peacekeepers who are responsible for this. They said they're trying to do it bit by bit, inch by inch, creep by creep, sort of like is happening in Donbass in eastern Ukraine. So what I'm suggesting is that we really have to see that those lines are held firmly, and there's no question about it, and that statement has to be made by all of the parties concerned. And my fear is it may not be, but so far it's worked. So, there we are. Putin has not managed to, really take over Georgia or really take over a substantial portion of that part of the world.
Okay, next question is quite weedy, but we can handle it. And it's from Jeffrey Laurenti. David.
Jeff. Hello, Jeff.
David, what signal, if any, do you see in Biden's choice of Vicki Nuland for Undersecretary of Political Affairs at State? Her handling of Ukraine in early 2014 may have deeply irritated European partners and perhaps intensified Putin's determination to up the ante. No? Will bygones be bygones?
I think for the most part, bygones will be bygones. As Deb said, I think Europe especially is prepared to, and Ukraine certainly is prepared to give Biden a very much a free pass for quite a while, and that includes all of the people he wants to see running the place. I think in terms of situations like that, the person really calling the show two people are going to be calling the show, and that's Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, and they're both very rational people, and they're both loved in all of those areas. So I'm less concerned about some of the other appointments that he may have felt he had to make for political reasons, or and so they were made and they're done, and but I think things will work out well.
Okay, although nice guys don't rule the world,
No.
and so there will be a moment that everybody is back to their own interests.
Yeah.
Do you not?
Oh yes, no, there's no doubt about that. Which is why I think it's so essential that red lines really be established so that people understand them and respect them. So there's no doubt about it. One of the problems is Trump, to a certain degree, like Obama did, was just inclined to establish these red lines and just say, oh, okay, they're fine, they're there, we're going to enforce them. And maybe he does and maybe he doesn't, but nobody can count on it. And that's the problem. People have to have a certainty that that a particular red line is not only going to work, but it's going to be respected by both sides, or at least understood by both sides, and enforced at least by one side enough so that another side will respect it.
A new era. Here is a question from Stephen Raymer. Tell us about the backstory of your book. How much more difficult was it to research and report this book? Hang on, things just jumped away. Report this book when you couldn't sit down at lunch with a diplomat or interview a historian in his or her office. How has the pandemic changed your method of reporting, if any?
Oh, well, first of all, like most people, I've gotten to love Zoom and phones and internet and emails. And I've been very fortunate. In the last half a century, I've been traveling the world. I do have a lot of emails and phone numbers of people that I can call on. And they've been very helpful and very good, nice. And remember, a lot of this book was reported. Really, a lot of the research was done before the COVID really began. It really began last March. I was pretty well into the writing of it by then. I came racing back from Paris on March 13th and went straight out to our place in Pennsylvania, where I have secluded in this little cabin in the woods since then. So that's when I really sat down to really writing it. A lot of the research and the work on it I had really done before then, in Paris, in other cities, and so on. But I have a pretty good. I have 27,000 names on my email list, so I can get around to most places.
Just you have to watch out for elections and then top it all off. This one is from Evelyn Leopold. And she asks, on Iran, there are hardliners and hardliners, as Wendy Sherman says. It appears different parts of the government are working against each other. Iran recently increased its enriched uranium stockpile, and in any deal, Iran is expected to insist on the lifting of sanctions that Pompeo has piled on day by day. How does Biden cope with that?
Well, it's going to take negotiation. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But remember, this negotiation, this treaty was negotiated when Biden and company were in office. They know all of the hot buttons, and many of the people in Iran were there during that time. They also know the hot buttons, Zarif and so on, and they understand that this is a very different kind of need, if you will, that this administration has and the Trump administration has. Now, you're not going to completely put the genie back in the bottle, because obviously they've said, look, we're starting to increase to 20%, enrichment. They announced that just the other day. That's disturbing. They're not letting back inspectors for the moment. That is disturbing. But again, all of this can be, in some fashion, there are ways to barter on some of these things. And the Iranians are not stupid. They know that that the United States and Israel and a few other powers could basically turn their entire country into a glass bowl if they really wanted to or had to. And so, they're not self-destructive in that respect. And also, I have to tell you, there are many Iranians who I know at fairly senior positions who really do honestly believe that the Quran does not allow, weapons of mass destruction like a nuclear bomb. Now, you may say that's a little Pollyanna-ish, but I think many of these people really do believe that. But they also want to see how far they can push the West and how much they can get out of them, so that, before that happens. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done this deal in the first place.
Well, I've also read and heard that there are back channels between Israeli citizens, and it's mostly about business. And it's the Revolutionary Guard people have the money, and Iranian Jews who don't live there anymore have the expertise, and they have their back channel. Let's go on, though, to Israel, one of my favorite topics. Ian Williams is asking, the West Bank, is that a red line for Netanyahu? Will it be enforced or walked back by the new administration? Can we also please throw in the Abraham Accords, which I must say is not a peace accord. Nobody was at war with the Israelis. This is a travel accord, as far as I can tell. This is so the Haredim can go to Dubai and get married in hotels. as far as I can tell. And then young backpackers can fly to China cheaply, where they couldn't do that before, in an Israeli airplane, and not have to cross to Jordan. I mean, that seems to me what this whole agreement's about. It's the travel plan. Anyway, let's
Well,
start with the West Bank, and if we can walk back to.
first of all, I should say that I'm particularly delighted by Qatar being welcomed back in, and the relations between those countries and Israel, because we have just sold my book into an Arabic edition will be coming out, but it's going to be produced by a Qatarian publishing house. So we were desperately fearing that it would not be welcome in most places of the Middle East. And guess what? As of yesterday, now it will be. So
Exactly.
Anyway,
You'll just have to check the translation.
very self-serving, but okay. So all right. So what's going to happen there? You might read chapter 9. Chapter 9, I deal with a lot of having to do with Israel and the West and Palestine and the Abraham Accords. In fact, I run a full page of the map, Jared Kushner's map of Israel, wish list map of Israel, which I thought was just so amusing. I had to run the whole thing. It's amazing. And all of this might work, provided the Israelis can just control themselves. If they can just not, if somehow they cannot start creeping up into those settlements, and taking more land. And so it all hinges on the self-restraint of Israeli leaders and their ability to see that there is something beyond the end of their nose. Ian's shaking his head. Is that not right? Oh, Ian's muted. I'm sorry. Well, Ian, we'll come back. We'll come back to it.
Ian,
We're going to everybody
can you
at the end.
unmute yourself? No, I don't think you can.
No, it's okay. Well, so anyway, so Ian, we'll have.
Hang on.
What I was saying was I very much doubt they've got this straight, because one of the points about these red lines for Israel and for everywhere else is there have to be something, and it comes out clearly from your book, they have to be something that can be popularly supported. So yes. Munich wasn't supported because most of the British and French thought the Sudeten Germans had a very good point. Right. They shouldn't have been in Czechoslovakia against their will after all. Yeah. And it's the same with the West Bank. If most of the Israelis think that Netanyahu is quite right to take as much of that land as possible, then it's going to take some heavy bludgeoning by the US, which is
that's my point, is that I don't think that most Israelis do believe that. I think a substantial number of Israelis, especially the far right, the right wing, and the particularly religious Jews, I think they do believe that. But I'm not sure the vast bulk of the Israelis don't understand that, for instance, a one nation solution is not a solution, because eventually the Jews will be a minority in their own country, and you'll have South Africa again, just as the whites as a minority, or the Jews as a minority, because the demographic realities are such that it's just not going to anyway. So that's the the Abraham Accords were badly conceived, but they might in some fashion work in the future. It's just that the Israelis have to have some degree of restraint on their actions. And I hope they can. And I think a lot will depend on what happens in the elections that are coming up in just a few months now.